It was the late 1980s, and the country called Yugoslavia was slowly coming apart. Marshal Tito had held it together for decades, but after his death in 1980, the old tensions between Serbs, Croats, and Muslims began to rise again. Economic problems made everything worse. In Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic rose to power by promising to protect Serbs no matter where they lived. In Croatia, Franjo Tudjman pushed a strong Croatian identity. And in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a land of mountains and mixed towns where Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats had lived together for centuries, Alija Izetbegović became the leading voice for the Bosniak Muslims. The 1990 elections split Bosnia along ethnic lines. Bosniaks voted for Izetbegovic's party, Serbs supported Radovan Karadzic, and Croats backed their own leaders. When Slovenia and Croatia declared independence in 1991, short but brutal wars broke out. Bosnia was next, but it was far more complicated. There was no clear ethnic majority. Many Serbs feared they would become second-class citizens in an independent Bosnia ruled by Muslims. They began setting up their own autonomous regions and arming themselves. In early 1992, Bosnia held a referendum on independence. Most Serbs boycotted it. Over 90% of those who voted chose independence. On March 3rd, Bosnia declared itself an independent country. Just 2 days earlier, a Serb wedding party had been shot at in Sarajevo. Barricades went up across the city. Yugoslav army units, still largely controlled by Serbs, moved into strategic positions. Secret plans to create Serb-controlled territory were already in motion. By late March, the first killings started in small villages like Sijekovac. Fear spread fast. Neighbors who had lived peacefully for years suddenly looked at each other with suspicion. The stage was set for something much larger. In April 1992, the war that would tear Bosnia apart finally began. On April 6, 1992, the United States and the European community recognized Bosnia as an independent country. That same day, Bosnian Serb forces backed by the Yugoslav army opened fire on Sarajevo. The longest siege in modern European history had started. For almost 4 years, snipers on the hills and mortars from the surrounding mountains would kill civilians going about their daily lives. Over 11,000 people would die in Sarajevo alone. The offensive was swift and brutal. In eastern Bosnia, towns like Bijeljina, Zvornik, Visegrad, and Foča fell within days. Bosniak civilians were driven out, rounded up, or killed. The phrase ethnic cleansing entered the world's vocabulary again. In Prijedor, detention camps were set up at Omarska, Karaterm, and Trnopolia. Men were beaten, starved, and tortured. Reports of systematic rape began to emerge from these places. The Bosnian government tried to organize a defense. The Army of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina was formed from police officers, volunteers, and whoever had a weapon, but they were badly outgunned. The Bosnian Serb army, commanded by General Ratko Mladic, quickly took control of about 70% of the country. Units of the old Yugoslav army simply changed their name and continued fighting. May 1992 brought horror after horror. A bread line in Sarajevo was shelled, killing 20 civilians. The world saw images of concentration camps on television. In the north, Serb forces fought to open a corridor connecting their territories. In the east, Bosniak defenders in Srebrenica managed to push back for a while. By the end of 1992, more than 1 million people inside Bosnia had been forced from their homes. The United Nations sent peacekeepers, but they were lightly armed and told not to take sides. Aid convoys were blocked or robbed. The war had only just begun. As 1993 arrived, the conflict became even more complicated. Bosniaks and Croats, who had been fighting together against the Serbs, turned on each other in central Bosnia. Croat leaders declared their own mini-state called Herceg Bosnia. Clashes broke out in several towns. In April 1993, Croatian forces carried out the Amici massacre, killing over 100 Bosniak civilians, including women and children burned in their houses. Bosniak forces struck back. Towns changed hands in heavy fighting. Croat civilians were killed in places like Grabovica, and Uzdol. Another massacre took place at Stupni Do. Mosques and churches were destroyed. The war inside the war was as savage as anything else happening in Bosnia. Meanwhile, the Serb campaign of ethnic cleansing continued without pause. The United Nations declared several safe areas: Sarajevo, Srebrenica, Gorazde, Zepa, and Bihać. These promises on paper did little to stop the shelling. Peace plans were proposed and rejected. NATO enforced a no-fly zone, but it changed little on the ground. Rape camps, mass graves, and destroyed villages became common sights. By late 1993, tens of thousands were dead, and the country was in ruins. In March 1994, the Washington Agreement finally brought Bosniaks and Croats back together into a federation. The main enemy was now clearly the Bosnian Serb forces, but the wounds from the fighting between former allies would take years to heal. By 1994, Bosnia had become a symbol of international failure. In February, a mortar shell landed in Sarajevo's Markale market, killing 68 people. The world reacted with outrage. NATO demanded that heavy weapons be pulled back from around the city. Serb forces complied for a time, but the pressure never really eased. In April, Serb troops attacked the safe area of Gorazde. NATO carried out its first limited airstrikes, but they were too little and too late to change the balance. In the east, the enclaves of Srebrenica and Zepa grew more vulnerable every month. UN peacekeepers, especially the Dutch battalion in Srebrenica, were outnumbered and lacked the mandate to fight. Throughout 1994, the United States quietly began to support the Bosniak and Croat side by allowing arms to reach them. Croatian forces, now working with the Bosniaks, started to regain ground. Peace talks continued, but none succeeded. Serb forces even took UN soldiers hostage as human shields in May 1995. The frustration in Western capitals grew. The war seemed endless, and the images on television were unbearable. Something had to give. The summer of 1995 would bring the moment that finally forced the world to act. On July 11, 1995, General Ratko Mladic's forces entered Srebrenica. What happened next is now recognized as genocide. More than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were separated from their families, taken to fields and warehouses, and executed. Their bodies were buried in hidden mass graves. Women and children were loaded onto buses and driven away in terror. The Dutch peacekeepers could only watch. The United Nations safe area had failed completely. The horror of Srebrenica shocked the world. A few weeks later, Croatian forces launched a major offensive called Operation Storm that crushed the Serb-held region in Croatia and changed the military balance. Bosniak and Croat forces began pushing forward in western Bosnia. On August 28th, another mortar shell hit the Markale market in Sarajevo, killing 43 people. This time, NATO responded with full force. Operation Deliberate Force began. Weeks of heavy airstrikes against Serb positions. Hundreds of targets were destroyed. Serb supply lines collapsed. The siege of Sarajevo was finally lifted. After 3 years of suffering, the war suddenly seemed close to ending. Intense negotiations took place in Dayton, Ohio, in November 1995. Slobodan Milošević spoke for the Bosnian Serbs. Alija Izetbegović represented the Bosniaks, and Franjo Tudjman spoke for the Croats. After 21 days, the Dayton Peace Agreement was reached. Bosnia remained one country, but it was divided into two main entities. The Bosniak-Croat Federation, controlling 51% of the territory, and Republika Srpska, controlling 49%. A weak central government and a rotating tripartite presidency were created. On December 14, 1995, the treaty was formally signed in Paris. 60,000 NATO peacekeepers moved in to enforce the peace. The fighting stopped, but the cost had been enormous. Around 100,000 people had died, the majority of them Bosniaks. 2 million others had been driven from their homes. Years later, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia brought some measure of justice. Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic were arrested and convicted of genocide and other crimes. Slobodan Milošević died while on trial. Many lower-level perpetrators were also prosecuted. Today, Bosnia is still a divided country. Ethnic politics dominate almost every aspect of life. Reconciliation moves slowly. Landmines from the war still kill and injure people. Yet the cities have been rebuilt. Sarajevo has returned to a kind of normal life. Young Bosnians dream of a future where identity is not defined only by ethnicity. The Bosnian War of 1992 to 1995 remains one of the darkest chapters in modern European history. It showed how quickly civilized neighbors could descend into brutality, and how slowly the world responds when it does. The scars are still there, but so is the memory of those who survived, and the hope that such horror never happens again.